So my home group is the primary purpose group for Alcoholics Anonymous in Austin, Texas. We meet on Tuesday nights, and for years we've been running a couple of hundred people on Tuesday night. Turns out now we have Zoom meetings and we have room meetings. And in our room meetings, we were running 225 people studying the Big Book. When it went to COVID, I'll never forget it, man. I mean, me and a couple other guys were like, bull, I am not doing a meeting on the computer for the next 2 weeks while we flatten out the curve, and thank God some of the people in our group took the reins. I saw Ashley on here, and she's the one that got us online, and man, it has exploded. We were running 500, 600 people, and so when we went back to our room meeting, we moved the Zoom meeting to Wednesday nights at 7:30 Central, and we'd love to have you. We're running, around 500 people on it. And Barry, would you put in the chat the information for Primary Purpose Group Austin? Just put PPG Austin, 7:30 Central Time, and our Zoom information. I appreciate it, buddy. My sponsor's Myers. Before that, my sponsor was Mark Houston. And I hope to get to talk about some of that stuff. Well, let's get going. My topic is step 6 through 9, and that's a lot of ground to cover. But you can't really do. Steve did 4 and 5 last week, so I know he did a good job. I think I even saw Steve on here. That Steve is a great Big Book step worker and one of my favorite speakers, I came to AA in 85. I've been sober since March 22nd of 1985. I'm about to be 64 years old in November, and I'm sober like 35 and a half years. In fact, in 5 days, it's my half birthday. So 35 and a half years. And I came to AA. I don't have time to tell a lot of story, and this really isn't that meeting tonight. We're talking about these steps tonight, but I came to AA back then, and I worked the steps, and I thought I was a Big Book guy. My home group was a Tuesday night Big Book meeting, and Mark Houston used to like to say, "How do you know what you don't know?" I mean, how could I possibly know what I was missing? But I missed a lot, because in the 12 and 12 it says we can have faith in God and still keep Him out of our lives. And what that looks like for me is I get sober for a minute, and physical sobriety starts to look like recovery, because my life gets better. I got a new pickup truck. I got a girlfriend. I got a little folding money in the bank. But I start getting a little nutty, and I start getting in trouble. And I start hitting walls. I hit a wall at 2.5 years sobriety, and I hit a wall at 4.5 years sobriety. I got married at 2.5 years sober, and we had a baby. And by 4.5 years, I'd blown that marriage up. So like a good AA, I waited the appropriate amount of time to get into another relationship, right? 16 days, and I'm back into another relationship, and by 5 years, I've blown up that marriage, and I'm like, my life is blown up in my hands, and it's the best I seem to be able to do, and it's not the way I want things to go. And my first approach to the step was basically, are you an alcoholic? Right? We didn't spend a lot of time talking about what it means in the first 44 pages of the book or the doctor's opinion. We didn't talk about physical allergy, mental obsession. But, I figure if there is such a thing as an alcoholic, I must be one. And then we go right from that to, do you have a problem with God? Well, I did, and one of the things I've noticed is my first job is when I give a guy a step 1 experience, we don't have to talk so much about God. The step 2 work goes a lot easier when I'm crushed by that self-imposed crisis. All of a sudden, I don't need for you to tell me what we're going to do. What's it going to feel like? What's the end result going to be? Do I approve of the whole process? It's just, what do you want me to do? But back then, we had to spend a lot of time talking about, and so, but I get to the 3rd step prayer, and my 3rd step prayer back then was basically get down on your knees and do the 3rd step prayer. And we did that, And then I started writing inventory. My first inventory was probably a lot different than what Steve described last week. My first inventory was basically just a confession of stuff I felt bad about, things I'd done that I felt bad about, and people I was mad at, and stuff I was scared of. You know, and it's funny, back then the resentment list was way long and the fear list was really short. Now it's just the opposite. You know, the fear list gets longer and the resentment list, you know, is shorter. But I read my inventory to that first sponsor, and he basically just sat there and listened to me read my inventory, you know, and I used to think that was my job here in inventory, was basically to listen to you read your fourth step. Well, I don't feel that way anymore. I mean, now I love that thing where it says it's a fact-finding and fact-facing project. I mean, now I really have started coming to believe that when I'm hearing your inventory, my job is the fact-finding as the sponsor, and their job is the fact-facing. You know, so because I can't see when I'm bringing stuff into inventory, I can't see it from an entirely different angle. You know, the book says we find that a solitary self-appraisal is insufficient, because I don't know about you guys, but I can't see a picture when I'm in it. You know, I can't see things from an entirely different angle. Sometimes I think I can, but then, you know, so that's why, you know, we go to each other, because I can hand this stuff out all day long to my sponsees, but when I get wrapped around the axle, I need to call Chris Schroeder, I need to call Marty, I need to call somebody, and they hand it right back to me, just like I've been handing it out to my sponsors all this time. You know, so the basic thing I wanted to say was about 17 years, I had some big events happen in my life. And mainly, it was this plane crash I was in. I don't have time to talk about it really tonight, but we had chartered a plane from East Hampton back into New York City in July of 2003, and the engine quit, and we crashed into the water at night. And it was really, came very close to dying. And it changed a whole lot of things. I was on CNN with this new reporter that was trying to make a name for himself. He had a little show called Live from the Headlines with Anderson Cooper. You know, and nobody had ever heard of him back then, but I'm on, you know, and some of my friends around the country are going, is that Charlie? You know, I mean, but, you know, I'm on there and it's, you know, I mean, who survives a plane crash? You know, we crashed into the water at night and we swam to safety but things started changing in my life. And I come back to Austin and I start looking at, I live in Austin, Texas. I'm a Dallas boy. I grew up in Dallas, but I've been in Austin for 40 years. Before I forget to say anything about it, I got a lot of ground to cover, but please forgive my voice. I had some throat surgery here a few weeks ago. It didn't go that great. I got to go have a little more, but it's not cancer. And if you guys can bear with it, I'll get through the hour, but it's pretty, I know it sounds like geese farts. So, you know, I won't be hitting any high notes tonight, you know, but, you know, so I come back to Austin and man, I start looking at the program differently and I realize how self-obsessed I am. And I don't even know that it's mentioned in the text, you know, and we start reading that book now when it says in the third step, the first requirement, you know, right after that A, B, and C, it says A, that we're alcoholic could not manage our own life. B, that probably no human power could relieve our alcoholism. C, that God could and what if he were sought. And the next, you know, that's where we went. If there's a mistake being made in Alcoholics Anonymous, assuming there are any mistakes being made, I think the biggest one is this skipping right from C, that God could and what if he were sought, to the third step prayer. That was my experience. And I used to be embarrassed to talk about how much I'd missed until I realized how much company I had. You know, I mean, it's a common error to go, because the next line after that ABC is it says, being convinced we were at step 3. Being convinced of what? Being convinced of A, B, and C. So if being convinced of A, B, and C puts me at step 3, A, B, and C must do a pretty good job of summing up 1 and 2. You know, and by now we hope to know, you know, that I'm alcoholic and can't manage my own life, that no human power could relieve my alcoholism, and see that God, and then turns out there's a requirement for Step 3 that I had missed for a long, long time, it says the first requirement is that I be convinced that my life run on self-will can hardly be a success. I'm telling you, not only was I not convinced of that, that line had never touched me because we skipped right from the second step to the third step prayer. And the way you would have been able to tell that that line had never touched me would have been by following me around. Does this guy look like a guy that's convinced that his life run on self-will can hardly be a success? Or does this seem like a guy that thinks, you know what, now that you got the booze off of me, I'll take it from here? That's what my life looked like. And I was in jackpot after jackpot after jackpot, and I'm blowing up marriages, and I'm overdrawn at the bank, and that sort of thing. And it's the best I can do sober. And the thing was, I didn't have anybody in my life at the time. I thought at 7 years, I kind of pulled back from AA a little bit. And I thought I'd run up against the failure of AA. I thought, this is where I thought, you know what, by God, I've tried it your way, and I'm getting knocked to the mat every time I step in the ring. And so I backed off on that. I'm still very much about staying sober and being an AA member, but let's just say we lightened up on some of the rigorous honesty. And, so I'll show you what half measures will get me. The thing about it, though, is I didn't have anybody in my life. It turns out that the biggest movement we can take with somebody in recovery is moving a guy from my problems are coming at me to my problems are coming from me. I thought if I could get my outward stuff in order, then I'd be okay inside. And it's just the opposite. My outward conditions are always a demonstration of my inward condition. So I didn't have anybody in my life telling me, when I thought I was running up against the failure of Alcoholics Anonymous, I didn't have anybody in my life at the time saying, Charlie, you're not running up against the failure of AA. You're running up against the failure of self-will. This is what it looks like when you try to run your life as a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. This is the best you're going to do as a sober member of AA. Maybe I'm the only one, but I'm going along in untreated alcoholism and probably not the best guy to be in a relationship with or work for, or what's it like to be, So anyway, so all that to say, like when you plug in this self piece into everything, it changed everything about my program. Now it's not just, and it's not reduced down to drink, don't drink. It's how do I show up? How does self manifest for me? What's it like to be my husband? My wife? What's it like to be my coworker? What's it like for me to be your dad? What's it like for me to be your boss? What's it like to be with me in traffic? And that sort of thing. And how am I showing up out there in the world? And my whole recovery picture just exploded because of those bedevilments on page 52. Well, now the inventory took on a whole different thing. Well, you might wonder, what does this all have to do with step 6, 7, 8, and 9? Well, it's funny. My wife, some of you know my wife, Katie, and and Marty, she said to call her, so she's looking forward to talking to you. But Katie is amazing and the best inherent inventory of anybody. And her third step is stellar, and AA is really doing great in our house and all this stuff. But one time, when we're talking about doing 6 and 7, some of you are familiar with these conferences called the Woodstock format. And the guy came up with the idea of doing a conference under a different format. And we're going to bring in popular speakers, but this time, instead of telling their story, they're going to tell a step. So these are a lot of popular speakers, and it's an honor to get asked to speak at one. And I got to do step 1 at one. I got to do step 10 at another. Well, so one of the times Katie had been asked to speak at one of them, the guy says, hey, Katie, we'd like for you to speak at next year's conference. And she says, oh, okay. And Lorenz was there with us. And if you don't know Lorenz, I hope you get to meet him someday. He's one of my favorite 10-step buddies. So Lorenz is out in the lobby. And so the guy that's the taper for this conference, he says, we want you to speak next year. Okay. And he says, check this out. How does it like to get hit with this one? You've been asked to speak at a big conference. Oh boy, this will be fun. And he goes, we'd like for you to do an hour on step 6 and 7. No, am I the only one that would run out of bullets? After about 8 minutes, I might have to start juggling or something. It's like, and a lot of times they give people that topic and they just tell their story. But, so Katie goes out where Lorenz is sitting, and after she goes back in and she tells the taper, she goes, Lee, I'm really a lot better at doing step 3. And he goes, okay, we'll put you on step 3. And here's this is a perfect example of the kind of crap I get from Lorenz. Katie goes out and sits down with Lorenz and says, I got him to give me step 3. And he goes, oh, that's too bad. It would have been interesting to see where God took you with 6 and 7. So now Katie's got to march back in and tell this guy, okay, give me 6 and 7, and producer of confusion rather than harmony. So we spend and we had a year to prepare for it. Well, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what came out of that, but now there's a piece of the 5th step that when we do the 5th step, after we've done our inventory and that sort of thing, and I'm a big book technician, I like to do the 5th step, but man, Mark Houston, I have a meeting back at my kitchen table on Thursday nights. We call the common solution. We want to be one voice, one message. Whichever one of us you're talking to, we hope you're getting pretty much the same, kind of AA advice. And we meet on Thursday nights, and it used to be me on one end of the table, Mark Houston on the other end of the table, and my sponsees sitting around. A lot of you guys have been to that meeting. And there was never one time that Mark Houston walked through my front door. He left work, drove an hour to get to the house, and made a point of being, and there was never one time that he walked through that front door that I didn't know, this is a big deal. This is a big deal that Mark is coming to the house. If you don't hear me say anything else tonight, hear me tell you to get a hold of some Mark Houston recordings and listen to it. I can't tell you how many people, even when he was alive, would come up to me and go, Mark Houston changed my whole life and I never even met him. I just listened to him on CD. Well, so he did a talk one time on the hour at the end of the 5th step. And we started talking about it, and I've been, and it was, some of Mark's recordings you can't just listen to them. You got to study them. You got to stop them. You got to take notes. You got to go back through. And this was one of those nights. And so what we started, Chad was there that night, and he told me a few months later, he goes, I think I comprehended about 10% of what Mark said that night. And that 10% revolutionized the hour at the end of the 5th step for me. Because, what Mark started talking about is that, one of the things we like to talk about is that completing one step moves me into the next step. When I've taken step 1, it propels me into the need for God. And then, then the 2nd step moves me into the 3rd step. The 3rd step, and all that awareness of self drives me into wanting to look at it in the inventory process. And so the steps are circular, not linear. I hear sometimes people talking about, I work the steps like it's something you take a test for and turn it in. But I really believe the steps are linear, and I'm a believer in being a step worker on a continual basis and doing multiple inventories, multiple 5th steps, and that sort of thing. But the thing is, I need to have a high level of awareness of the previous steps that I've done to take me into the next step. Does that make sense? turning to the last paragraph at the end of the fifth step, it says, taking the book down from our steps, carefully reading the first 5 steps, we ask if we have omitted anything. And the thing about it is, it's asking me some questions, and what am I going to take into the 6th step? Holy cow, have we been doing some work with that? What am I willing to take into the 6th step? So it says turn back to the page. So I go back and I review the first 5 steps. And I look at my experience with the allergy of the body. And I look at the obsession of the mind. And at certain times, I got no mental defense against the first drink. And is that my condition? I touch my first step experience at 35 years sober, and go back and say, is that still me? Is that, am I lucky to not be drunk or dead right now? And is it, and from that, is that my experience with the malady? Do I get restless, irritable? This is all going on in that hour, and I visit those bedevilments on page 52. And is that me, if I'm not in this work? Am I a prey to misery and depression? Can't control my emotional nature, all those sorts of things, and I'm looking at this stuff in that hour. So now all of a sudden, this hour at the end of the 5th step becomes a real piece of business, and then I go into the 2nd step. I look at all my prejudices with God and that sort of thing. And, choosing once again, is God everything or is he nothing? What does that even mean? What areas of my life am I not willing to take God into? And so, so is my life really none of my business? What does everything look like? What if I were to take everything? So my circumstances, my work, my kids, my job, all that stuff, am I willing to take that to God? And, and then in the 3rd step, am I willing to meet the requirement that it takes to take it into the 6th step? Have I experienced that stuff in the 3rd step? Requirement that any life, drunk or sober, it's based on self-will, can hardly be a success. Is that my condition? Is selfishness, self-centeredness the root of my problem? Delusion, self-pity, all that stuff. And am I willing to take all that into step 6? Over and over, I'm saying, am I willing to take all that into step 6? Am I willing to take all that into step? All my troubles are my own making, moving out of this idea that it's somebody else's fault, and that my problems are really coming from me. They're not coming at me. And then my 3rd step, decisions and the relationship I have with my Creator. And, I offer myself to thee. Do I mean that? Or is that just churchy talk? And really look at the intent of these words. Who's in my life? Who's not in my life? That sort of thing. And am I willing to give that up in step 3? And then I review my 4th and 5th step, my resentments, my fears. Am I willing, the futility and fatality of these resentments, am I willing to take all that into step 6? My sex conduct. Am I willing to take all that into step 6? At 35 years sober, am I willing to take that stuff to God in step 6? And so now you see how this hour is really becoming a serious piece of business, And so I look at all these inventories. How do I want to go to God? Clean or dirty? How do I want to show up? I want to show up clean, but I got a ton of stuff on me, And this is me doing the best I can as a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And am I willing to take into it that I'm aware that guys like me should have died drunk a long time ago? Is that my belief, And so the blessings of my life, the gifts, the friends, it rips me when I touch the fact that on my own power, it rips me of all this arrogance and grandiosity that I carry around. And I see that all the good stuff in my life is really a gift from God. And it changes everything about the way I do this stuff. And so, the 6 and 7, there's a lot about humility in 6 and 7. Wow, you see how it just exploded that hour at the end of the 5th step for me? And so now if I've touched all that stuff and I really reviewed, I have a clear awareness now of the work I did in the previous 5 steps. And so, do I get taken there? Am I moved into step 6? Is this where I want to go with this stuff? Well, the first 5 steps placed me in a position to take step 6. And now I'm showing up for 6 with some real business, this willingness. And if I hadn't had a serious connection experience in the first 5, I'd spin my wheels at 6 and 7. Does that make sense? If I don't see how powerless I am, when I get to 6, one of the things we talk about is I can drag my ego through this process and come out the other end untouched. You know, I'll give you an example. One time I was sitting at the end of the table by myself. I had a beef with somebody at the shooting club where I go. I looked at who I was mad at, what they did, how it affected me. I did the sick man exercise. I looked at it from an entirely different angle. And I thought, oh man, I'm glad I did that. You know, I was really getting off the beam there for a minute. And I was getting up to go to work. And I thought, wait a minute. God didn't have anything to do with that process. That was just me looking at it, thinking I'm seeing it from an entire, and all of a sudden, very cleverly, my ego has turned the inventory process into an exercise in self-will, you know, and I trapped myself in that, you know, where you're going, wow. So now I'm really taking God into all this stuff. And so it's, well, here's what I came up with out of 6 and 7. The more I thought about 6 and 7, it seems like it comes down to 4 things. So I come out of the inventory. Now I'm going in, you know, one of the things that we talk about is that the 4th column in the inventory turns the 2nd column into a lie. And the first time I heard that, I thought, what are they even talking about? I know the 2nd column really happened. I saw it happen. That's why I wrote it down. Wouldn't be writing it down if it wasn't. Well, over and over again, I come into the inventory process with a resentment. I see it from an entirely different angle. My favorite thing to hear when I'm hearing inventory with a guy in resentment, when you get them to see it from an entirely different angle, and they see how selfish and self-centered and fear-driven and delusional their take was. My favorite thing to hear a guy say when he's doing inventory is for him to go, oh my God. That's when we've hit gold. When he goes, my God, I never even thought about them for a second. I never gave one thought to how that was affecting them. I've been waiting for them to come apologize to me. I need to find them tomorrow and make amends to them. Has anybody had that experience? I mean, it happens over and over and over again, where I come in with a resentment, go out with an amends. Well, so now I got all this awareness of how selfish, self-centered and lustful and arrogant and prideful and whatever it is that it, you know, goes around up in the wonderful package of being me. And I come into step 6 with this new awareness of the things in my life that are objectionable. Well, here's the way I see 6 and 7 rolling out. This thing, you know, I don't know about you guys, but I've never had to really dig too deep to find stuff to work on in my sobriety. You know, I mean, it seems like sometimes it's coming at me a little faster than I'd like to be addressing it, you know, but I mean, because you're just sitting there minding your own business, all of a sudden little bitty problems on the horizon. You know, as it gets closer, you go, you know, this may be a problem. And by the time it gets here, you're like, oh, this is a serious problem. And then it's on me like this, and all I can see is the problem, you know, and they're coming at me like, you know, over and over and over again. So this problem, whatever it is, I see 4 things happen in 6 and 7. And it can show up in a lot of different stuff. You know, God Almighty, when I put down the booze, I self-medicate with a lot of different stuff. You know, I mean, the things that are available to us: smoking, gambling, pornography, food, obsessively collecting things, getting married, having babies, whatever it is, you know, and I do also. So if it becomes objectionable, the first question in step 6 is, whatever this is that I've noticed, is it objectionable to me? Is this something where I go, my God, this is not the guy I want to be? When it says we ask God to turn our thoughts to what he would have us be, I work with that a lot. What would God have me be today? What would God have what would God have me be going into this meeting here this afternoon? You know, not this meeting, but a business meeting, you know, something like that. Who does God want me to be in this situation? Well, if this thing that I'm dealing with all of a sudden is objectionable to me, and a lot of us have a long history with stuff being objectionable and nothing changing, right? I mean, I walked around saying I'm an alcoholic for years and it didn't do a damn thing for me, you know? Well, so whatever this thing is it objectionable? Well, the next piece in step 6 is if this thing is objectionable to me, the next piece of this is do I have the power to change it on my own? And if it's objectionable to me and I don't have the power to change it on my own, we got a real problem. You know, and I've got some problems I've had some problems like that in recovery. Maybe one year it's gambling. Maybe another year it's overeating. You know, and you look up and go, my God, this is a problem. And it's looking like on my own, this is the best I'm going to be able to do with it, you know. And that's what I go to God with in humility and powerlessness and just go, oh my God, you got to help me, man. You know, because I got something on me that's really bad and I can't do anything about it. You know, over and over, the book takes me to, here's the situation, Charlie. Do you admit that it's objectionable? Oh, and by the way, you can't do a damn thing about it on your own power, you know? And so if it's objectionable to me and I don't have the power to change it on, because if I got the power to change it on my own, just knock it off, you know, whatever it is, just quit it, you know? But it's the stuff I come up with where I go, I don't think I can whip this one. I think this one's got me. Well, if I don't have the power to change it on my own, the next question is, am I willing to let God change it in whatever way he sees fit? Because once I've been crushed by a self-imposed crisis that I can't postpone or evade, I don't get to instruct the Creator on how it ought to work itself out. You know, it's like, okay, God, I'm willing to give you the money as long as you let me keep it. You know, I like what my buddy Bob says. That he says it's all God's money until it's Bob's money, and then you know, and then it's different. You know, but I mean, whatever the problem is, if it's objectionable, am I willing to let God change it in whatever way he sees fit? That's a real surrender. God, I'm willing to give this to you, and you tell me what this is going to look like. If those 3 things are in place, then I go to God with it in the 7th step, and I say, my Creator, I'm now willing that you should have all of me, the good and the bad. I don't, you know, whatever it is. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. I don't even know which ones it is, right? But it says, you know, grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. But you know, we talk about the steps 4 through 9 are like a golf swing. This vigorous course of action is not just 4 and 5, it's 4, you know, take an inventory, see it from a different angle, look at it if it's objectionable at 6, am I powerless, take it to God in 7, and all those things. Remember how we said completing one step moves me into the next step? Well, you don't do half a golf swing. Now you got to take it 4 through 9, because in the 3rd step, we made this deal with God that said, it's an amazing deal we make with God in the 3rd step, and it's very, very simple. The terms of the deal we make with God, it says, being all powerful, he provides what we needed under 2 very simple conditions. It says, if we stay close to him and perform his work well. Well, it turns out, now the funny thing about it is that we call that the pivot point in the book. It's at the top of page 63. Everything in the book leads up to that deal right there, and everything from there on out refers back to that deal. It's the pivot point in the book where it says, being all powerful, he'll give me what I need if I stay close to him and perform his work well. And from there on out, there ain't nothing else. Everything from that point forward is about one of those 2 things. It's either about staying close to him or performing his work well from the rest of the book. Well, turns out I can't stay close to God until I get close to God. And I can't get close to God when I'm blocked. So what this vigorous course of action is about is removing the things that are blocking me from this power that I've admitted is the only chance I got at making a go of this thing. Is that true or not? You know, are my two choices really die an alcoholic death or live life on a spiritual basis? I got to touch that sometimes. Is that part of my belief? Or have I developed some magic door number 3 over the years? You know, I mean, you know, so is it really, you know, live, you know, go on to the bitter end, accepting, blotting out the consciousness of my intolerable situation, or accept spiritual help? Are those my two choices? That's that turning point that the book talks about. It's funny, for years in the How It Works, what I call the most often read, but least listened to portion of the big book, you know, it says, we stood at the turning point. And I never asked myself what the turning point is. But it's that deal we just talked about on page 25, where it's go on to the bitter end or accept spiritual help. Live life on a spiritual basis, die an alcoholic death. That's the turning point, but there's no flashing red sign at the turning point. It's go this way or go that way. Well, so now in this inventory process, like we've been talking about, it's brought me out. I've seen it from a different angle. I've seen how it's objectionable in 6 and 7. And now I got work to do because I come out of that process. And after step 7, you know, I wish, I keep trying to find a place in the book where it says into chill, you know, or, you know, now just say, you know, it says into action, you know, I mean, because, you know, it says on 76, it says, right after that 7th step prayer, it says, now we need more action, which we find that faith without works is dead. You know, it's funny, I don't want to be controversial, but there's quotation marks around that faith without works is dead. That's because it's quoted from the letter of James in the Bible, 2:14 to 2:26. How about that? They're quoting outside literature in the big book. But, but it says, faith without works is dead. You know, let's look at steps 8 and 9. Well, I want to finish up by talking for a little bit about 8 and 9, because when Mark Houston came into my life, I'm sober about 17 years, and Katie and I, we didn't decide to go to this big book workshop this weekend. We were moved to this thing. It was the weirdest thing. Looking back on it, it was like God picked up Charlie and Katie, who were both struggling, and moved us 230 miles to this big book workshop. There were times when I wouldn't have been excited about going to a big book meeting, much less driving for 4 hours to talk about the big book Friday night, Saturday, all day Sunday. And we meet this guy, Mark Houston. And at one point, I mean, I was like, anybody remember that Bose commercial where the guy's sitting in the chair and blowing his hair and his tie's black, you know, like that? I mean, that's what I felt like during this singing. And at one point, he's up there reading, and I lean over to Katie and I go, my God, what book is he reading from? You know, and she's like, well, I think it's the big book. You know, I mean, but talk about having missed a lot. He was coming, and I've had that experience with other people since then. Well, so Mark eventually, and the other thing about it, here's something crazy, talking about getting moved to that thing. After Mark died, I plugged in one of the CDs from that weekend that we were out. Mark had talked about going silent for 3 years. One time, he was just wiped out from talking all the time. He thought his ego was getting away from him. And he went silent for 3 years. I knew that it happened, but I didn't know him when all that happened. I plug in that CD, and it started off by saying, well, I can't wait to see how this goes because I haven't done anything like this in about 3 years. And it just, I couldn't speak because I'm looking at the evidence of the hand of God, moving me and Katie up to Denton and picking Mark up after 3 years of silence and putting us together. And the ripple effect of that weekend has been amazing to get to watch and be a part of, you know. So then Mark says he's going to move to Austin, of all places. And I asked him, I said, are you going to sponsor anybody? He says, yeah, I'll take 3 people. I said, could I be one of them? And he goes, yeah. Yeah. So he comes to us, and I got sponsors. I'm back in the work at this point. I'm taking guys through the work and stuff, and we're doing well. Mark comes to the first common solution meeting, and my boys are kind of excited, because Charlie's got a new sponsor, and what's this going to go like? And think about it. What's the first thing, if you think you got a new sponsor, what's the first thing you figure you're going to do with this new sponsor? I don't know, but I figure we're probably going to write inventory, You got a new sponsor, we're going to write inventory. Mark comes to the house at night. I'll never forget it. He sits down at the table, and we're all sitting there, and we're going to see how this is going to go. And out of nowhere, he says, "Where are you guys at with the amends process?" And we said what an alcoholic says when he doesn't have an answer. He needs a minute to think about it. And we went, "What?" And he says, "Where are you guys at with the amends process?" And I'm like, wow, I didn't see that coming, because my first amends, I'd done a bunch of them. We call them the tornado amends. If I'm a tornado roaring its way through people's lives, I'd made amends to the first people that would have been touched by that tornado. But I was amazed before I was halfway through. And that list had kind of found its way into a drawer somewhere. Well, Mark sits down and he says, "I sense that there's a significant experience available for you guys in the amends process." And we're like, how does he know that? We thought he was like Svengali or something, And for the young people, that was a hypnotist from a long, long time ago, So the reason he knew that is because nearly all of us have a significant experience available in the amends process. One of the biggest things that happened when I started working with Mark was he was about making all of our amends, made a list of all the people we have harmed, and made amends to them all. And we sat down, and now all of a sudden we start talking about the amends process, and we make out our lists, and we put them on the cards, and on the card we put who we owe the amends to, the nature of the harm, and then we ask 3 questions. The first question is, have I harmed you in any other way? And then after that question, I put, shut up and listen, right? And then the second question was, is there anything I can do to help make this right? Shut up and listen. And after the third question is, would you like to tell me how this made you feel? Shut up and listen. Now, these are very powerful questions, because part of living a life based on selfishness and self-centeredness is I have very little awareness of my effect on other people, right? You ever just roll along and you look up and somebody's crying or somebody's angry, and you're like, what? And, in the big book, it says I'm almost always in collision, even though my motives are good. I sponsor men. And one of the things I see with men is we don't think we should be in trouble if we weren't trying to hurt your feelings, right? He says, even though my motives are good, I always want to talk about my motives, So Katie will say, you really hurt my feelings and embarrassed me in front of those people at that dinner the other night. I'm like, well, I wasn't trying to hurt your feelings. And she's like, look right in here. Look right in here. You see anybody that gives a flip what you were trying to do? I'm telling you, you hurt my feelings. But I didn't mean to, right? Does that sound familiar? So all I want to talk about is what I meant to, what I was trying to do. But now, it says, even though my motives are good, and it's, if only people would do as I wish, everything would be great. So you put those things together, and I can't ever hardly see my own selfishness. Well, we start looking at some of these harms, and man, the further you get into the philosophy of making amends to everybody you harm, the more stuff starts popping up. And we all have spiritual consent with each other. One of the things we establish at the table is, if Kevin was coming to the table on Thursday nights, I'd be saying, if we establish spiritual consent with each other, I'd say, Kevin, look, I'm giving you the right to call me on anything you see me doing whether it hurts my feelings or not. We like to say, I'd rather step on your toes than stand on your grave. It's all done with love and compassion. But if we don't call each other, so, it would not, I was at a conference and I put on a bunch of weight. I got weight. I mean, left to my own devices, I don't know how much I'd weigh, but and I don't gain 5 pounds. I gain 30, 40, 50, 70 pounds. So I'm rocking around. I'm bigger than I've been in a long time, and my wife doesn't want to be a widow again. And Dan comes up to me at this conference, and he says, "Charlie, what's going on with the weight?" I said, "Yeah, man, I need to lose some weight." And this old combat backline veteran warrior with tears in his eyes says, "Stop saying that." I'm like, "What?" He goes, "We are about action and power. If you need to lose weight, then get about it. And if you don't have the power to do it on your own, then go to God and ask for the power. But stop saying, I need to lose weight because it's killing me. I don't want to have to carry your casket because you wouldn't do anything about it." And I'm like, whoa, this is a serious conversation. And I didn't get to pick the topic, It's like wandering into an intervention, I mean, so, thank God I have men in my life that will take that kind of action on my behalf. And so anyway, all that to say, one night we had a meeting at the table where there's 8 or 10 of us. I said, "Hey guys, this exercise just came to me. For next Thursday night's meeting, let's all make a list of our amends, current amends that we owe right now. And next Thursday, we all got spiritual consent with each other. We'll all sit down next Thursday and read our amends list to each other." Wow, did I underestimate the power of that little exercise? Because let me tell you, if you call that meeting, there's something that you need to bring to that meeting that I didn't see coming. And it's one of these, because when Marty's reading off his amends list, my list gets longer. I'm sitting there with my little list, and this guy goes, "I ate in the restaurants and then left without paying." I'm like, "Oh, well, okay." And then somebody else says, I bought gas and drove off without paying for it." You used to be able to do that, kids, back before everything was credit card, And so I go, "Oh, okay, I got to write that one down." And then one other guy goes, "I stole all the emotional energy from my home and stole all the attention that should have gone to my sister because I was the one always getting in trouble, the self-centered budding alcoholic, and I robbed my parents of the security of their home and robbed my sister of the affection that should have come to her." Right. Jesus. So we're going all the way there, and so now I come out of this, and Mike, I got this list, and now I'm not making amends. And as you're making amends, things start, but one of the funny things about making amends is that the bulk of the advice in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous is geared toward not having to make the amends. If you got an amends you don't want to make, all you got to do is go over to the AA club and ask 2 or 3 people. Somebody will tell you don't have to do it. They might even say something like, "Well, it says, except when to do so would injure them or others, and you're a part of others." So, and the book is clear about that, where it says the rule is we're hard on ourselves and easy on others. So obviously we're not part of others in that instance. One time I had a sponsee, and we were up at the big AA club over here, and I said, "Chris, come here and check this out." I said, I'm going to chair the meeting today, and I'm going to chair it on making direct amends to those people we've harmed. He says, "All right." I said, "I want you to observe, and I want you to watch people avoid the topic, change the topic, or talk about why you don't have to make them." And at the end of the meeting, I called him over and I said, "What'd you think?" And he goes, "My God, if you hadn't told me it was going to happen, I wouldn't have believed it. Because halfway through the meeting, at one point I go, does anybody have experience with making direct amends to all the people you've harmed? Because one guy's like, I am not going back to every greasy spoon that I've eaten at. He goes, if these amends, if I don't pay attention to it, they will wither and die like a plant that doesn't get water. If it doesn't bother me, I just let it wither away. And I'm going, this was one of my dear friends, and I said, that if the root of our problem is selfishness and self-centeredness, what if my program got down to that the only thing that decided whether or not I make this amend is whether or not it bothers me, right? Who gives a flip whether it bothers me or not? Did it harm them or not? And do I need to go clean it up? And then the other one that drives me crazy is living amends, where it says, well, because one lady at that meeting, I swear to God, I'm not making this up, same meeting, this one lady goes, well, I used to work for a company and I embezzled money from them, but I'm making living amends to them because I'm working in another company now and I'm not stealing from them. And I'm like, well, that's got to be really comforting to the people you stole from. It'd be like me coming to Marty going, hey, listen, I stole your golf clubs out of your garage, but I just want to tell you, I'm not doing that anymore, so we're even. What most people describe as living amends is just practicing these principles in all of our affairs. Of course, I'm not stealing anymore, but that's not making direct amends to the people we've harmed. The only place it comes close to talking about living amends is in the family. It says, yeah, there's a long period of reconstruction ahead. But then the next line's killer. It says, we must take the lead, right? But, with the family, it might be a minute. I get out of treatment, I can't figure out why they're not baking me a cake, and they're still hiding their purse from me, So it takes a minute sometimes for the family to come around. But the funny thing about it is that when you listen to some of the best AA speakers, the most dramatic God-inspired stories are about the amends process. There's situations that come out of the amends process that cannot happen unless God's involved. I've seen it happen over and over and over again. I had one sponsee, street junkie, alcoholic, street guy, and within a year of getting sober, I watched him get on a plane to fly to Mount Olive, New Jersey to settle a 19-year-old warrant. And as he was heading for the airport, he told me, he said, Charlie, I don't know what's going to happen, but the only reason they would throw me in jail is because there's somebody in that jail that I'm the only one that can carry the message to them. That's not the power of my sponsorship or the power of this guy. That's the power of God moving in somebody's life, and to see stuff like that happen over and over again. Why would we talk somebody out of that? So now once the guy has made his amends list, my job as a sponsor changes. Our conversations start off by going, have you made any approaches this week? Have you made any approaches this week? Where are you at with your amends? Then we'll talk about, what's going on at work and that sort of thing. But, have you cleaned up any of that stuff from that list? Oh my God. I mean, it's just, everything has taken off in my life. And I mean, I don't even know how to tell you what is available. My favorite thing to see is people that have been hanging around these rooms for a while, whether they've been going in and out, or whether they've been here and not doing very well. And to see them latch onto this thing and work a program at a different level and experience it. Because what I like to do is, what I would do is go to the meeting, get in meeting-based sobriety, I'd go to the meeting, get a little relief, go back out to living a life on self-will. By tomorrow night, by God, I need another meeting. So I'm getting relief, but I'm never experiencing freedom. And to see somebody latch on to the freedom that's available as a result of getting in this work is one. I don't know which is more powerful, being able to have a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, or being able to show somebody else how to have a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. My experience has been, if a guy has been lit on fire by this process, you don't have to force that guy to carry the message. You can't stop him from carrying the message. You know, the thing I like to close with is that if you're new or fairly new, we're super glad you're here. We hope you stay and be a part of our deal. But there's a lot of message of hope for the newcomer in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm here to talk to what I like to call middle management. I am sick of losing middle management. You know, if you got 5 years, 15 years, 25 years, and you're not feeling what you hear people describing, I'm here to tell you it's available. And it's available as a result of getting with somebody and saying, I don't know what to do. Would you show me what to do? One of the most powerful lines in the book is a promise for an AA member. It's on page 152, and it says the most satisfactory years of our existence lie ahead. Ask yourself, is that your current belief? Or does it feel like it peters out after 5 or 10 or 15 years? It's real simple. If you've got this deal, get out and share it. And if you need it, come get it. I'm Charlie Parker. I'm an alcoholic. Thanks, everybody.